This is the editing room of a scholar, a professor of philosophy. His name is Huston Smith. For 6 months, Dr. Smith has been doing research on a special project and recording his findings on film. His purpose has been more than usually serious and profound. He's made an attempt to discover America's own moral answers to 16 of the most basic public and private issues that Americans face. In his search, Dr. Smith has traveled thousands of miles and asked literally hundreds of questions. He's talked with scholars and statesmen, newspaper editors and economists, philosophers and politicians. Tonight, from these priceless film records of that journey, Dr. Smith has drawn together what he believes are America's best answers to another basic problem of our future. Tonight on The Search for America.
I'm Huston Smith. The object of our search tonight is ourselves. The question, what is the highest goal our lives can achieve? We've had occasion on this search for America to talk a good bit about our nation's objectives in foreign policy, in race, in economics, and in other areas. But what about our personal objectives? Suppose our national policy were to be wildly successful. Suppose perpetual peace and prosperity were to be assured and each American citizen free to pursue his own personal destiny without interruption. Would we know how to proceed? Or would we be like that man who longed for eternity and didn't know what to do with a rainy afternoon? What is the objective of our lives? What do we take to be the highest goal that they can achieve? Is it pleasure, happiness, achievement, duty well done, the sense of belonging, the sense of having contributed? As literature is one of the places where we get the clearest vision of what life might be, the first man I wanted to talk to about this question was a man of letters, and I knew which one I wanted. He is Mark Van Doren, who for the past 30 years has been teaching at Columbia University in New York City. I wanted him not only because he is himself a Pulitzer Prize winning poet, but because he enjoys, I found, a unique distinction. The distinction that under him, more perhaps than under any other teacher in America, students have found themselves. So one morning I made my way to where Mr. Van Doren has been living for the past 20 years, in his apartment at 393 Bleecker Street in the heart of New York City's Greenwich Village. Mr. Van Doren, I've heard you say that man has a duty to be happy. Do you think a man can be happy today without shutting his eyes to the fear and danger and tragedy that surrounds him?
It's never been easy to be happy, and it isn't now. It's the hardest thing to be happy, but it's a duty. I mean by that such a simple thing as that we like people who are happy. We don't like people who are unhappy. Nobody wants an unhappy person around. We want children to be happy. We actually get angry at them if they're not. But happiness, seriously considered, is the achievement only of very distinguished people. Only very distinguished people know anything about happiness.
And this achievement doesn't require any compromise with realism. You don't have to escape into any sort of fantasy in order to have it?
Oh, no, I certainly don't mean fantasy. The happy people are the people who know everything about all the reasons that exist why they should not be happy, but they are nevertheless. It's like the power to believe. Only a great person can believe. Ordinary people can't believe anything. They haven't got the vitality to believe anything. Neither have they the vitality to be happy. You speak of the bad world around us. It's bad partly because it's full of unhappy people.
Is it possible that happiness perhaps is a cheap goal? I remember that Mill said that it's better to be Socrates unhappy than to be a pig happy. Is that true?
Oh, no. Happiness to me is the greatest of all things. It's the end of life. It's the reward of virtue. It's what we live for. Happiness is not a cheap thing. Happiness is not an easy thing. And happiness is not always expressed by laughing and by grinning. Joy is a very solemn experience. We weep with pleasure. We weep with happiness. Why do we do that? It's because it's something almost too great, I should say, to contain. Happiness is not the same thing as gladness. It's not the same thing as being glad. Happiness is not the same thing as being lucky. Very unlucky people can be happy.
But is happiness something that we fall into, that happens to us like love?
To a certain extent, that's true. Some people have the genius for being happy, and others don't seem to have it.
Is there anything we can do about it? Anything we can do to achieve it, or at least more of it?
Well, I think education makes people happy. When I see a person who says he's educated and yet is unhappy, I doubt that he was educated. There, the art of their happiness becomes a kind of art. I've already said that I believe the greatest happiness that we find is in the use of our mind. Think of what it is to be able to read a good book. We can be very sorry for people who can't read good books, either because they can't read at all and are therefore slaves. In our society, the illiterate person is surely the slave, either for that reason or because they're restless, they're nervous, they are thinking only about themselves and can't give themselves to the wonderful experience of reading, in which you participate in other people's lives and learn about how great men can be.
Is there anything at all to the saying that ignorance is bliss? How did this get started?
Well, you know where it came from.
I don't think I do.
It's in one of Thomas Gray's poems in the 18th century. He went back to look at Eton, where he'd gone to school as a boy. And he himself now was a man with all the cares of a man. And he saw the boys of another generation playing ball, shouting and chasing the ball over the playing field. And he said, just like that, that he envied them, the fact that they didn't know yet anything about the world. But I would say that he could very well have been happier than they was, partly because he could think that. He was thinking about something that was utterly foreign to them. There's a wonderful moment in Shaw's Back to Methuselah when one of the ancients, who by some accident have stumbled upon a way to live thousands of years instead of 70. One of Shaw's convictions was that we don't live long enough. About the time anyone begins to have a little sense, he has to die. Well, these ancients, by a freak of biology, have not died, and here some of them are several thousand years old, and they're wandering around one day. Some of them bald-headed, gray, not very interesting to look at, and one of them gets in the way of a very young man who's running around, maybe playing a game. And the young man is a little impatient because this old ancient is there. The ancient finally steps aside. And the young man says something to show that he pities the ancient because he doesn't have a good time. The ancient said something that I've never forgotten. I saw this in the theater, heard it in the theater 30 years ago. He said, "Infant, the ecstasy of life as I live it would strike you dead." Ideally, the older you are, the happier you should be. I feel very sorry for old people who are not happy. They must have lived badly. They should be able to have a very good time in their minds.
Is there anything that you would add to pleasures of the mind as being pretty important ingredients for happiness?
Well, the one thing that I think of offhand is not different. I'm not sure that anything gives me personally more pleasure than a good conversation, such as you and I are having today. I'm enjoying this very much.
Likewise.
I'm not sure that anything is more fruitful than good talk. I feel very sorry for people who, meeting together in the evening, can't talk to one another. They have to rush out and see something. They have to turn on something. They have to be entertained. They could entertain one another.
Mr. Van Doren, what writers impress you as having the clearest vision of the way life ought to be lived?
I prefer those writers who have a clear vision of how life is lived. No great writer tells you how to live your life. He tells you how you do live your life. Shakespeare, for instance, doesn't tell anybody how he should live. Homer doesn't. Tolstoy doesn't, except in some of his minor works, which are very beautiful things, but he's written in his old age when his great powers were spent. No, the business of literature is to tell us how we do live, not how we should. Nobody knows, I think, how we should live.
I was just going to ask you whether out of a writer's description of the way we do live, we gather some insight into the way we ought to live. But I gather that you're saying that it isn't the function of literature to do this.
A great storyteller is a man who doesn't know how people ought to live. But he loves people, and he thinks they're just about all right as they are. And there are all kinds of them. And so he represents them, good and bad. He even loves bad people, as the way God does. I'm serious about this. It's enough, it seems to me, for us to know what life is and can be, has been, maybe. Not what it should be. We all distrust literature, which is didactic, don't we? Which is trying to put over something on us. One very interesting way to look at Shakespeare, who to me is, by all odds, the greatest of all men who ever lived, is to ask you, one way to appreciate his greatness is to ask where he wanted the world to go. He didn't want it to go anywhere. He wanted it to stay right here and be the wonderful thing that it is, full of Hamlet and Lear, Rosalind.
And you would share this perspective. It's enough for you that people are what they are.
It's enough for me that the world is what it is.
Is what it is.
It's a terrible world, and I love it.
If literature provides one angle of vision on the good life, religion provides the other important one. And so, from a great teacher of literature, I turned to a great theologian. I drove from New York City to Boston, Massachusetts, and there, in his office at Harvard's Semitic Museum, I had a long-awaited conversation with Professor Paul Tillich. Dr. Tillich, what is the highest good that man's life can achieve?
To become real what he is potential.
Well,
to bring into reality the powers which are given to him.
is it obvious what we mean by the realization of our potentialities? And does this mean the same thing for all people?
I believe that every human being has something, even often very hiddenly in the corner of his soul, which is sacred to him. I never have found a human being to whom nothing is sacred, even if it is the cynical desire to have nothing sacred. Then this desire is sacred to him. So you cannot escape what I call ultimate concern. The only question is, which concrete thing is the bearer of his ultimate concern? And there all the differences of religion and what we call today quasi-religion as political systems occur. The ultimate concerns are different. And here I make the difference between the authentic and unauthentic expressions of it, those which are really genuinely born out of an ultimate concern, and those who are only taken and have lost any power over the man. And I make another distinction, which is perhaps more profound in this respect, namely the distinction between the divine and the demonic forms of ultimate concern.
What makes an ultimate concern demonic?
The destructive character, and perhaps I could go even more sharply to your point, saying if it is against justice and truth. And it was very interesting to observe when I observed the development towards Nazism in the 20s, before I was thrown out, how they started with the destruction of justice against everybody else, except against their own movement, and with truth. Truth is what must be said in order to keep the ruling group in power, namely themselves.
It would seem then that whatever else human fulfillment involves, it must at least conform to the structures of justice and truth.
And truth.
Yes. We've been talking about human fulfillment. Why do we fall so far short of it?
We fall away from what we could be, namely united in love through justice and truth, because we want to draw the whole world into ourselves and our finite reality. And this is the old doctrine of the paradise story. You will be like God. That's the temptation.
Do you think that all the meaning our lives may have is to be found within our present lifespan? What I'm asking, I suppose, is whether there's life after death.
Yes, and I would add, you also asked whether there was life before birth.
I suppose I am.
And
implying
these
it,
two
yes.
things always should seen together.
Yes.
Now you know that in the Indian theology for many centuries, perhaps millennia, this doctrine of the reincarnation in different forms through the whole process of time is one of the central tenets of this religion. We don't have that in Christianity. I myself am doubtful how to deal with it. We cannot say that the life process of a child which died before it became 1 year old, or a feeble-minded, or even a man who comes out of bad surroundings and never found much of the actualization of his life, is now finished in eternity.
You say we cannot
We
say
cannot say that. I really feel there is a kind of gap in Christian thinking. In Roman Catholicism, there is a doctrine of the purgatory, which does in some way a similar thing.
Yes.
But in Protestantism, this has never been taken very seriously. And so I am now in a difficult situation with your question, but I can only tell you that I see the lack of an answer to this question in Protestant Christianity. This is my first answer to it. I simply must confess something of ignorance about this. Cannot simply accept the Indian doctrine, I cannot accept the Catholic doctrine, but I cannot retire to the traditional Protestant doctrine. So here we are before a problem, and it's my hope that in the encounter of religion, perhaps Christianity will do what it did once when it encountered the Oriental religions, which existed in the Roman Empire, and the Greek religions, the Greek philosophy, taking in a lot of it. Perhaps we can take in something from India just on this point.
Very good. Let me now come back to this idea of reconciliation or acceptance. It's a key notion in your idea of human fulfillment. What does it involve?
Everybody has a hidden hostility against his own being. We are hostile against other human beings, even if we believe we love them. We are hostile towards the ground of our being. We are afraid of the inner judgment, which is connected with the principle of justice and love. And so we need this kind of reconciliation. Now, the main impediment against the feeling of reconciliation is that we feel judged, that we feel rejected, condemned, or however you express it. And therefore, the first and basic step in the process of reconciliation is that we get the feeling we are accepted. And I like to express that in the little bit paradoxical phrase, accept that you are accepted in spite of being unacceptable. That's the summary of my theology in this respect.
And this means that though there are drives, tendencies within us which lead to consequences which we could interpret as standing judgment upon us, there is at the same time a power which, despite all that we do, works in our behalf towards healing.
Yes, towards healing. And we have now again the very interesting fact that theology has learned a lot from psychotherapy. The good psychotherapist accepts the patient and doesn't put moral demands upon him. He doesn't say, don't drink, but he says, I know you are drinking too much, so let's see where it comes from. You are my friend. We all are in the same boat. I also am judged in many respects, but in any case, I accept you. I hope you can accept me. And now let's go on and find out what the background of this is. Now, this kind of medicine has taught the ministers of today quite a lot, namely that they shall do what they always speak of, namely the good news. The good news is not that one shall be good, but the good news is that one can be good although one is not good.
Dr. Tillich, if the human race should destroy itself by blowing up this planet, would this have any bearing at all on the meaningfulness of life?
I'm very glad you bring this question out of the mere individualistic discussion we had up to this moment to the society and to history. My answer to your question is definitively no. The meaning of history doesn't lie in any imagined future in history itself, but it lies in what is created in every moment of the historical process and has its fulfillment in eternity, and eternity is something else than endless time. Here and now, history fulfills itself. For instance, in our talks in this moment. This is history, and this is the beginning and the end also of this moment of history. But to think if history goes on a few thousand years longer, that then the meaning of history is more obvious is fantastic in my mind. I believe that if history is not fulfilled in every moment, it's not fulfilled at all.
I want to read to you one of your sentences. You say that all is vanity, yet through this vanity, eternity shines through to us. What does this mean?
This means even if we are in the feeling that life has not much meaning, we spoke about that just a moment ago, that if we take this question of meaning seriously, then in the very seriousness of our question, the ultimate meaning is still present. That we can say, why do you take this so seriously? Because this is for what I am here. This is my question of to be or not to be. This is the question of life and death for me. And even if I know no answer, if I don't know any answer whatsoever, the seriousness of my question is the manifestation that I still have my ultimate concern and have the meaning of my life.
If there really were no meaning, it would be impossible to take the question of whether there is seriousness.
Exactly. Every question presupposes an answer which already has been received. Out of an answer you ask questions. And then you get perhaps more answers, perhaps not. But this answer which is preceding the question is that element of meaning which shines through the vanity vanitatum.
It's axiomatic that the greatness of America ultimately depends upon the greatness of its citizens, and their stature in turn depends on what they choose to give their lives to. This problem is more difficult for Americans today than it was in the past, when the primary needs of our country were for physical strength and material abundance. For the calls of the body are clear and compelling, whereas those of the spirit are usually soft and distant. Consequently, once the needs of the body have been met, it's more difficult. It takes vitality as well as insight to choose those things that lead to greatness and understanding and largeness of heart, in preference to those which slope towards ease and atrophy and self-engrossment. I have a feeling tonight of having listened to words that point in the right direction. If in the years to come we can follow leads like these, America, having become great in power, will be on its way to becoming great in spirit as well.
This is National Educational Television.